Doctors told 16-year-old Lisa, "You only have 3 months to live." When Elvis heard this, what he did not only change that girl's life, but also made medical history. The corridors of St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis carried a unique atmosphere that mixed hope with heartbreak, cutting-edge medical science with the tender care required for the youngest and most vulnerable patients. Founded by entertainer Danny Thomas with the mission of treating catastrophic childhood diseases, the hospital had become a beacon of hope for families facing every parent's worst nightmare: a child diagnosed with a life-threatening illness. In the pediatric oncology wing, the walls were painted in cheerful colors, designed to lift spirits and create an environment that felt less clinical and more welcoming to children who were already facing challenges that most adults couldn't imagine. Cartoon characters and inspirational messages decorated the hallways, while play areas and family lounges provided spaces where normal childhood activities could continue, even in the midst of intensive medical treatment. It was in this environment that 16-year-old Lisa Williams found herself in the spring of 1976, occupying room 314 in the hospital's most specialized wing. Lisa had been a typical teenager just 6 months earlier, active in her high school's drama club, passionate about music, and dreaming of attending college to study journalism. Her room at home had been filled with posters of her favorite musicians, including several prominent images of Elvis Presley, whose music had been a constant soundtrack to her adolescence. The transformation from healthy teenager to cancer patient had been swift and devastating. What had initially seemed like ordinary fatigue and occasional headaches had escalated into more serious symptoms that finally drove her parents to seek medical attention. The diagnosis of acute lymphoblastic leukemia had shattered the Williams family's world, turning their comfortable middle-class existence into a daily struggle with medical appointments, treatments, and the constant fear of losing their only child. Lisa's parents, Robert and Margaret Williams, had exhausted their savings and taken leaves of absence from their jobs to be with their daughter during her treatment. Robert, who worked as an accountant for a local manufacturing company, found himself navigating the complex world of insurance claims and medical billing, while Margaret, a former elementary school teacher, had become an expert on childhood cancer treatments and experimental therapies. The family had relocated temporarily to Memphis to be close to St. Jude, where Lisa was receiving the most advanced treatment available for her condition. They rented a small apartment near the hospital, creating a makeshift home base from which they could maintain some semblance of normal family life, while dealing with the extraordinary circumstances of Lisa's illness. Lisa's room at St. Jude had become her world, decorated with cards from classmates, flowers from family friends, and her beloved collection of Elvis records that she played on a small portable record player her parents had brought from home. The music provided comfort during the long hours of treatment and served as a connection to the life she had known before cancer changed everything. The medical team treating Lisa was led by Dr. Rebecca Martinez, one of the hospital's most experienced pediatric oncologists, who had dedicated her career to fighting childhood cancers. Dr. Martinez had seen hundreds of cases similar to Lisa's, and while she maintained hope and continued aggressive treatment protocols, she was also realistic about the challenges they faced. Lisa's particular form of leukemia had proven resistant to the standard treatment regimens, and despite months of chemotherapy, radiation, and experimental drug combinations, her condition continued to deteriorate. The cancer cells seemed to adapt to each new treatment approach, and the medical team found themselves running out of conventional options. The physical toll of the treatments had been severe. Lisa had lost her beautiful brown hair, her weight had dropped dramatically, and her energy levels fluctuated wildly depending on her treatment schedule. Despite these challenges, she maintained a remarkably positive attitude that impressed everyone who met her, from the medical staff to other patients and their families. What concerned the medical team most was not just the physical progression of Lisa's disease, but also the psychological impact it was having on her and her family.
At 16, Lisa was old enough to understand the gravity of her situation, and the medical staff had been honest with her about her prognosis while still maintaining hope for potential breakthroughs or improvements.
During one particularly difficult week in early March, Dr. Martinez had been forced to have the conversation that every oncologist dreads. Lisa's latest test results showed that the cancer was advancing more rapidly than they had hoped, and the treatment options that remained were extremely limited. The statistical reality was that Lisa likely had only a few months to live, and the focus of her care would need to shift from aggressive treatment to comfort and quality of life. The conversation with Lisa and her parents had been heartbreaking. Dr. Martinez had explained the situation with the combination of medical honesty and compassionate care that she had developed over years of dealing with such situations. Lisa had listened quietly, holding her mother's hand, and asked only a few practical questions about what to expect in the coming weeks and months. Following the conversation with Dr. Martinez, Lisa had spent several days processing the reality of her situation. Her parents were devastated but trying to remain strong for their daughter, while Lisa herself seemed to be working through a complex mix of fear, sadness, and a surprising determination to make the most of whatever time she had remaining. It was during this period of adjustment to her new reality that Lisa began talking about her wishes for the time she had left. Unlike many terminally ill patients who wanted to travel to exotic locations or experience grand adventures, Lisa's desires were relatively simple and centered around the people and activities that had brought her joy throughout her life. Her primary wish, which she shared first with her parents and later with the hospital's social work team, was to meet Elvis Presley. Lisa had been a devoted fan since childhood, and Elvis's music had provided comfort and escape during the most difficult periods of her treatment. She had often told her parents that listening to Elvis sing made her feel like everything might somehow work out, even when the medical reality suggested otherwise. Margaret Williams initially dismissed her daughter's wish as impossible, explaining gently that Elvis was one of the most famous people in the world and probably couldn't be contacted by ordinary families like theirs. However, Lisa persisted in talking about her wish, and it became clear that this wasn't just a passing fancy, but something that had deep meaning for her. The hospital's social work department, led by coordinator Janet Thompson, had experience helping families navigate the emotional and practical challenges of terminal diagnoses. Part of their mission involved helping patients fulfill reasonable wishes and create positive experiences during difficult times. When Lisa's case was brought to Janet's attention, she recognized both the challenge and the potential importance of attempting to make contact with Elvis. Janet had worked with celebrity requests before, though never involving someone of Elvis's stature. She understood that the chances of success were minimal, but she also recognized that the process of trying might be almost as meaningful to Lisa and her family as actually achieving the goal. Sometimes the knowledge that people were working on your behalf could provide emotional support, even if the ultimate objective wasn't reached. The process of attempting to contact Elvis proved to be more complex than anyone had anticipated. His management team was notoriously protective of his privacy, and the volume of fan mail and requests he received made it unlikely that any individual request would receive personal attention. Janet began by researching the proper channels for such requests, reaching out to talent agencies, fan clubs, and anyone who might have connections to Elvis's organization. After several weeks of phone calls and letters that seemed to disappear into the void of celebrity management bureaucracy, Janet was surprised to receive a phone call from someone claiming to represent Elvis's interests. The caller, who identified himself as Joe Esposito, one of Elvis's close associates, said that Elvis had somehow learned about Lisa's situation and was interested in learning more. The initial contact between Elvis's organization and St. Jude Hospital had come through channels that no one had expected. Rather than through the official requests that Janet Thompson had been making, the information about Lisa had reached Elvis through a more personal connection. A nurse at the hospital happened to be the cousin of someone who worked in Elvis's organization,
and casual conversation during a family gathering had led to Lisa's story being shared. Elvis had always been known for his generosity toward children and his particular sensitivity to stories involving young people facing serious challenges.
Throughout his career, he had quietly donated money to various charities and had occasionally made private visits to hospitals,
Though these activities were rarely publicized because he preferred to help without seeking attention for his charitable work. When Elvis learned about Lisa's situation and her wish to meet him, he was immediately moved by her story. At this point in his life, Elvis was dealing with his own health challenges and personal struggles, but stories involving sick children always touched him deeply. He saw in Lisa's situation an opportunity to use his fame and influence to bring some joy into a young person's life during an incredibly difficult time. Rather than delegating this responsibility to his staff, Elvis took personal charge of arranging a visit to the hospital. He contacted the hospital administration directly, working with them to plan a visit that would be meaningful for Lisa, while also respecting the privacy and medical needs of other patients. The hospital staff was initially skeptical that Elvis himself would actually appear, as they had dealt with celebrity promises before that had fallen through. But Elvis's personal involvement in the planning process convinced them that this was genuine. The logistics of arranging Elvis's visit were complex, involving security considerations, media management, and coordination with Lisa's medical team to ensure that the visit would occur at a time when she was feeling well enough to enjoy the experience. Elvis insisted that the visit be kept private, with no media coverage or publicity, because he wanted the focus to remain entirely on Lisa and her family. Dr. Martinez was consulted about the timing of the visit, and she recommended scheduling it during a period when Lisa's treatment cycle would allow her to have more energy and feel better physically. The medical team was supportive of the visit, recognizing that positive emotional experiences could have meaningful impacts on patients' overall well-being and quality of life. As the date of Elvis's visit approached, the excitement at the hospital was palpable, though the staff worked hard to maintain normal routines and not create additional stress for other patients and families. Lisa herself was almost overwhelmed by the prospect of meeting her idol, alternating between excitement and disbelief that such a thing was actually going to happen. In the days leading up to Elvis's scheduled visit, the hospital became a hub of quiet but intense preparation. Security arrangements had to be made to ensure that Elvis could enter and leave the facility without creating disruptions for other patients and families, while also protecting his privacy from potential media attention. The hospital administration worked closely with Elvis's security team to develop a plan that would minimize the impact on normal hospital operations. Lisa's parents were almost as nervous as their daughter about the upcoming visit. They had spent weeks trying to prepare Lisa for the possibility that something might prevent Elvis from coming, not wanting her to be disappointed if circumstances changed at the last minute. However, as the arrangements became more concrete and detailed, they began to believe that the visit would actually happen. The medical team made adjustments to Lisa's treatment schedule to ensure that she would be feeling as well as possible on the day of Elvis's visit. Dr. Martinez postponed a chemotherapy session that would have left Lisa nauseated and exhausted, instead scheduling it for several days after the visit. The goal was to give Lisa the best possible chance to enjoy and remember the experience. Lisa herself spent considerable time thinking about what she wanted to say to Elvis when she met him. She had been a fan for so long that the prospect of actually having a conversation with him seemed almost surreal. Her parents helped her prepare some questions and topics she might want to discuss, while also reassuring her that it was perfectly normal to be nervous about meeting someone she admired so much. The hospital's child life specialists worked with Lisa to help her process her emotions about the upcoming visit and to manage her expectations about what the experience might be like. They explained that meeting a celebrity in person could sometimes feel different from what people expected, and that it was important to focus on enjoying the moment rather than trying to make it perfect. On the morning of the scheduled visit, the hospital seemed to operate with an undercurrent of anticipation that was noticeable to anyone paying attention. Staff members who were normally focused entirely on their medical duties found themselves glancing toward the entrances and checking their watches more frequently than usual. The knowledge that Elvis Presley would soon be walking through their corridors was exciting even for people who weren't particularly fans of his music. Lisa woke up that morning feeling a mixture of excitement and anxiety that made it difficult for her to eat breakfast or concentrate on anything other than the approaching visit. Her parents stayed close by, providing reassurance and helping her prepare for what everyone hoped would be a memorable and positive experience. Elvis arrived at St. Jude Children's Hospital on a Tuesday afternoon in late March, entering through a service entrance that had been arranged to minimize disruption and maintain privacy. He was accompanied by only a small entourage, having deliberately kept the group small to avoid creating a circus-like atmosphere that might detract from the purpose of his visit. Dressed more casually than his typical stage appearance, but still maintaining the distinctive style that made him instantly recognizable, Elvis was guided through the hospital corridors by Janet Thompson and Dr. Martinez. As they walked toward Lisa's room, Elvis asked detailed questions about her condition, her treatment, and her family situation, demonstrating a genuine interest in understanding her circumstances rather than simply going through the motions of a celebrity appearance. The staff members they passed in the corridors recognized Elvis immediately, but the professionalism of the hospital environment meant that they maintained their focus on their duties, while acknowledging his presence with respectful nods and quiet greetings. Elvis returned these acknowledgments warmly, showing appreciation for the work being done at the hospital and the care being provided to children like Lisa. When they reached Lisa's room, Elvis paused outside the door to compose himself and prepare for what he knew would be an emotionally charged encounter. Dr. Martinez briefly reviewed Lisa's current condition and energy level, confirming that she was having a good day and was eagerly anticipating the visit. Elvis knocked gently on the door before entering, a small gesture that showed his respect for Lisa's privacy and his understanding that this was her space. When he stepped into the room, Lisa's reaction was immediate and profound. Her face lit up with a joy that seemed to transform her appearance, making her look more like the healthy teenager she had been before her illness than the cancer patient she had become. "Hello, Lisa," Elvis said, his voice carrying the warmth and sincerity that had endeared him to millions of fans. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." His approach was gentle and unhurried, allowing Lisa time to process the reality of his presence before expecting her to respond. Lisa's parents, who had been sitting beside her bed, stood up as Elvis entered, clearly overwhelmed by the surreal nature of having such a famous person in their daughter's hospital room. Elvis immediately put them at ease, introducing himself to them as simply Elvis, and thanking them for allowing him to visit their daughter. The conversation that followed was natural and unforced, with Elvis showing genuine interest in Lisa as a person rather than simply fulfilling an obligation to a sick child. He asked about her interests, her school experiences, and her dreams for the future, treating her with the respect and attention he would give to any important conversation partner. What happened during Elvis's visit went far beyond a simple meeting between a celebrity and a fan. As the conversation progressed, something remarkable began to occur that surprised everyone present, including the medical staff who had seen many similar visits over the years. Lisa, who had been weak and listless for weeks, seemed to gain energy and vitality as she talked with Elvis. Her voice became stronger, her posture improved, and the spark in her eyes that had dimmed during her illness began to return. It was as if Elvis's presence was providing a kind of therapy that medicine hadn't been able to achieve. Elvis spent over an hour with Lisa, far longer than the brief visit that had originally been planned. He seemed genuinely fascinated by her perspective on life and her remarkable maturity in dealing with her illness. They discussed music, of course, but also talked about books, movies, and Lisa's dreams of becoming a journalist if her health improved. During their conversation, Elvis shared some of his own struggles and challenges, speaking to Lisa with an honesty and vulnerability that he rarely displayed publicly. He talked about the pressures of fame, the difficulty of maintaining genuine relationships, and his own fears and insecurities. This mutual sharing created a connection between them that went far beyond the typical celebrity-fan interaction. Perhaps most remarkably, Elvis began to sing for Lisa, not a performance, but an intimate, personal serenade that filled the hospital room with the voice that had made him famous. The songs he chose were gentle and hopeful, selected specifically for their potential to comfort and inspire rather than simply to entertain. The effect of Elvis's singing on Lisa was immediate and dramatic. As his voice filled the room, she seemed to relax completely for the first time in months, as if the music was providing a kind of healing that transcended physical medicine. Her parents watched in amazement as their daughter's entire demeanor changed, becoming more peaceful and content than they had seen her since before her diagnosis. Dr. Martinez, who had stepped into the room to check on the visit, was struck by the transformation she observed in Lisa. As a medical professional, she was trained to be skeptical of non-medical interventions, but she couldn't deny the positive change she was witnessing in her patient. In the days following Elvis's visit, the medical team at St. Jude began to notice changes in Lisa that they couldn't entirely explain through conventional medical understanding. Her appetite improved significantly. Her energy levels increased, and most remarkably, her blood work began to show improvements that hadn't been seen in months. Dr. Martinez was cautious about attributing these changes directly to Elvis's visit, understanding that cancer treatment could involve unexpected fluctuations and that hope alone wasn't a cure for leukemia. However, she also recognized that the psychological and emotional impact of positive experiences could have real physiological effects on patients' recovery processes. Lisa herself seemed transformed by the visit in ways that went beyond temporary mood improvement. She began participating more actively in her physical therapy sessions, showing interest in planning for her future and demonstrating a renewed engagement with life that inspired everyone around her. The hopelessness that had characterized her attitude following her dire prognosis had been replaced by a determination to fight her illness with everything she had. The improvement in Lisa's condition continued over the following weeks, surprising her medical team and creating cautious optimism about her prognosis. While Dr. Martinez emphasized that they were still dealing with a serious and potentially terminal illness, the positive trends in Lisa's health markers suggested that her body was responding better to treatment than it had been before Elvis's visit. Elvis, who had been moved by his encounter with Lisa, maintained contact with her and her family through cards and occasional phone calls. He seemed genuinely invested in her recovery and wanted to provide ongoing encouragement and support. This continued connection provided Lisa with additional motivation and emotional support as she continued her treatment. The story of Elvis's visit and its apparent impact on Lisa's condition began to circulate quietly within the hospital. Though the family maintained their privacy and avoided media attention, medical staff found themselves discussing the case in professional forums, debating the role that hope, inspiration, and positive emotional experiences might play in patient outcomes. As Lisa's improvement continued over the following months, her case began to attract attention from medical researchers interested in understanding the connection between psychological factors and physical healing. While no one was suggesting that Elvis's visit had magically cured her cancer, the correlation between the visit and her improved condition was too significant to ignore. Dr. Martinez began documenting Lisa's case more carefully, tracking not just her physical symptoms and test results, but also her emotional state, social interactions, and overall quality of life. She was particularly interested in understanding whether the dramatic improvement that followed Elvis's visit could be sustained over time and whether similar interventions might benefit other patients. The concept of psychoneuroimmunology, the study of how psychological factors influence the immune system, was gaining recognition in medical circles during this period, and Lisa's case seemed to provide a compelling example of how emotional and psychological factors might impact physical healing. However, Dr. Martinez was careful to maintain scientific objectivity while also remaining open to possibilities that traditional medical training might not have prepared her to consider. Lisa's parents were amazed by their daughter's transformation but remained cautiously optimistic, understanding that cancer could be unpredictable and that improvements didn't necessarily guarantee long-term survival. However, they also couldn't deny the dramatic change they had witnessed in their daughter following Elvis's visit, and they were grateful for whatever factors were contributing to her better condition. The nursing staff who worked closely with Lisa on a daily basis were perhaps the most impressed by the changes they observed. These professionals had extensive experience with pediatric cancer patients and were skilled at recognizing both genuine improvements and temporary fluctuations that might not be meaningful in the long term. In Lisa's case, they observed sustained changes in her energy, attitude, and overall demeanor that seemed to represent a fundamental shift in her condition. Over the course of the summer, Lisa's blood work continued to improve. Her energy levels stabilized at higher levels than she had experienced in months, and her overall prognosis began to shift from terminal to cautiously optimistic. Dr. Martinez found herself revising treatment plans and discussing possibilities for Lisa's future that had seemed impossible just a few months earlier. By the fall of 1976, Lisa's condition had improved so dramatically that she was able to return home to her family and resume some aspects of normal teenage life. While she continued to require regular monitoring and occasional treatments, she was no longer confined to the hospital and was able to re-engage with activities that had been important to her before her illness. The medical team at St. Jude continued to follow Lisa's case closely, both because of their ongoing responsibility for her care and because of their professional interest in understanding the factors that had contributed to her remarkable recovery. Dr. Martinez published a carefully worded case study that discussed the potential role of positive psychological interventions in pediatric cancer treatment, using Lisa's case as an example while protecting her privacy. Lisa herself returned to high school, though she remained somewhat fragile and required accommodations for her ongoing medical needs. Her experience with cancer had changed her in profound ways, giving her a maturity and perspective that set her apart from her peers, while also deepening her appreciation for ordinary experiences that she had previously taken for granted. The relationship between Lisa and Elvis continued through occasional correspondence and phone calls, with Elvis taking a genuine interest in her recovery and her plans for the future. He seemed to understand that their connection had been meaningful for both of them and that maintaining contact provided ongoing emotional support for Lisa's continued healing. Lisa's parents remained grateful for Elvis's intervention in their daughter's life, though they were careful not to overstate the role that his visit had played in her recovery. They understood that medical treatment, family support, and Lisa's own determination had all been crucial factors, but they also recognized that Elvis's kindness and the hope it provided had been significant elements in their daughter's healing process. The story of Lisa's recovery became an inspiration for other families dealing with childhood cancer, though the family was careful to avoid suggesting that celebrity visits were medical treatments or that other families should expect similar outcomes. Instead, they emphasized the importance of hope, community support, and maintaining connections to the things that bring joy and meaning to life. Lisa Williams not only survived her cancer but went on to live a full and productive life, eventually pursuing her dream of becoming a journalist and using her platform to raise awareness about childhood cancer and the importance of psychological support for patients and families. Her experience with Elvis and her subsequent recovery became a defining story that she shared carefully and thoughtfully, always emphasizing the complexity of factors that contribute to healing. The medical community continued to study cases like Lisa's, gradually developing a better understanding of how emotional, psychological, and social factors interact with traditional medical treatments in ways that can influence patient outcomes. While no one claimed that celebrity visits or positive experiences were cures for serious illnesses, there was growing recognition that these factors could play important supporting roles in comprehensive treatment approaches. Elvis's visit to St. Jude and his relationship with Lisa became part of his personal legacy, representing the kind of private generosity and genuine human connection that characterized much of his charitable work. For Elvis, the experience reinforced his understanding of how his fame and influence could be used to make meaningful differences in individual lives, particularly those of young people facing extraordinary challenges. The story also highlighted the importance of hope in medical treatment and recovery, demonstrating how meaningful human connections and positive experiences could provide emotional and psychological resources that supported physical healing. Lisa's case became a touchstone for discussions about holistic approaches to medical care that addressed not just physical symptoms, but also the emotional and spiritual needs of patients and families.
Years later, when Lisa reflected on her experience, she emphasized that while Elvis's visit had been profoundly
Meaningful to her, her recovery had resulted from a combination of factors, including excellent medical care, family support, her own determination, and perhaps most importantly, a sense of hope and purpose that helped her fight her illness with everything she had. The visit from Elvis had been a catalyst that helped spark these other factors, creating a synergy that contributed to her remarkable recovery and her continued commitment to helping others facing similar challenges.